A racist white woman's child bullies a black child at a neighborhood park. The black child's mother confronts her, but is shocked at the response she receives. Maya Ellis walks slowly behind her son, Jamal, as they made their way into the neighborhood park. The air was warm, filled with the scent of freshly cut grass and the sounds of children laughing and playing. The park was spacious, with a large playground to the right, a basketball court to the left, and a grassy field stretching out in the center. It was late afternoon, the golden hour when the sun cast a soft glow over everything, making the scene almost picturesque. Jamal was already eyeing the basketball court, where a group of kids around his age were playing a spirited game. His fingers itched to join them. Maya could see it in the way he bounced slightly on his toes, barely able to contain his excitement. "Mom, can I go play?" Jamal asked, turning to look at her with bright, hopeful eyes. Maya smiled and nodded, though she couldn't shake the slight unease that had settled in her chest. "Of course, sweetie. Just be yourself and have fun." Jamal grinned, and with a quick, "Thanks, Mom," he took off towards the court, the ball under his arm. Maya found a bench nearby where she could keep an eye on him, placing her bag beside her and settling in. She watched as Jamal approached the group, his expression open and friendly. One of the boys glanced at him, then looked away, passing the ball to another player without acknowledging Jamal's presence. Jamal didn't seem to notice at first. He stood at the edge of the court, waiting for a chance to jump in. The kids continued their game, their movements fluid, as if they'd been playing together for years. Maya could see Jamal's smile start to falter as each minute passed, the excitement in his eyes dimming. Maya's grip tightened on the edge of the bench. She wanted to stand up, to walk over and introduce herself, to encourage the kids to include her son, but she hesitated, telling herself that kids were just being kids. Sometimes it took a little time for new faces to be welcomed into established groups. Still, her unease didn't fade. As the game went on, Jamal's attempts to join in became more noticeable. He ran alongside the other players, calling out, "Pass it here, I'm open." But the ball never came his way. The boys seemed to form an invisible barrier around him, always managing to pass the ball just out of his reach. A girl with blonde hair tied in a neat ponytail, whom Maya recognized as Emily Thompson, Karen Thompson's daughter, made a sharp turn with the ball, pretending not to hear Jamal as he called out to her. She shot the ball into the hoop with a practiced ease, then turned her back on Jamal without so much as a glance. The other kids cheered, high-fiving each other, while Jamal stood on the sidelines, his shoulders slumping slightly. Maya felt a pang in her chest. She wanted to call him back, to tell him that it was okay if today wasn't his day, that there would be other times. But something in her stopped her. Perhaps the hope that things would change, that the kids would warm up to him if he just kept trying. Minutes stretched on, and it became clear that Jamal wasn't going to be included. His enthusiasm had completely drained away, replaced by a quiet confusion. He shuffled back toward Maya, his steps slower, the ball now dragging slightly on the ground. "Mom," Jamal started, his voice small as he reached her. "I don't think they want me to play." Maya's heart sank. She forced a smile and pulled him close, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "Sometimes it takes a little while to make new friends," she said gently. "Don't worry, Jamal. They'll come around." Jamal nodded, though he didn't look convinced. He sat down beside her, the ball resting on his lap, and watched the game from a distance. Maya stroked his back absent-mindedly, her eyes fixed on the court. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the park, Maya couldn't help but feel those shadows creeping into her thoughts. The park, which had seemed so inviting at first, now felt different, colder somehow, despite the warmth of the day. The next afternoon, Jamal was eager to return to the park. Despite the previous day's disappointment, he was determined to try again. Maya admired his resilience. He was always quick to bounce back, always ready to give things another shot. "Are you sure you want to go back today?" Maya asked as they walked down the street toward the park. She didn't want to discourage him, but a part of her worried about what might happen. "Yeah, Mom," Jamal said, his voice filled with that familiar optimism. "Maybe today will be better." Maya nodded, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She wished she could share his hope. As they approached the park, she noticed the same group of kids already gathered at the basketball court. They were laughing and joking with each other, completely at ease in their small circle. Jamal jogged ahead, dribbling the ball as he went. Maya followed more slowly, her eyes scanning the park. She spotted Karen Thompson sitting on a bench near the playground, chatting with another mother. Karen waved casually in Maya's direction, a friendly gesture that felt oddly out of place given the unease simmering just below the surface. Maya raised her hand in a half-hearted wave but didn't approach. Instead, she found a bench closer to the court, settling in with a book. She opened it, but her attention kept drifting back to Jamal. Jamal approached the group with the same enthusiasm as the day before, but the kids' reactions were noticeably different. This time, they didn't even pretend to ignore him. They actively avoided him. Emily, who seemed to be the ringleader, rolled her eyes as Jamal came closer. "Hey, can I play?" Jamal asked, his voice clear and confident. Emily glanced at him, her expression flat. "We're already in the middle of a game," she said dismissively. "Maybe later." Jamal hesitated, clearly disappointed, but nodded. "Okay," he said, stepping back. He stood on the sidelines, bouncing the ball idly, waiting for a chance to join. Maya felt her heart tighten as she watched. She could see the other kids whispering to each other, casting glances in Jamal's direction. They huddled closer together, making sure to keep the ball within their tight circle, never letting it stray toward Jamal. Minutes passed, and the exclusion became more blatant. Whenever Jamal moved to an open spot on the court, the others quickly filled it, as if deliberately blocking him out. When he called out for the ball, they pretended not to hear, their laughter louder, more forced. Maya clenched her fists in her lap, feeling a surge of frustration. She wanted to march over there, to demand that they let Jamal play, but she held back. Confrontation wouldn't help, she told herself. Kids would be kids. They just needed time to get used to him. But as she watched Jamal's shoulders slump further with each passing minute, it became harder to hold on to that belief. The game eventually ended, and the kids gathered to the side of the court to take a break. Jamal approached again, his hope still flickering, despite everything. "Can I play now?" he asked, trying to sound casual. One of the boys, a tall, lanky kid named Tyler, shrugged. "I guess," he said, though his tone was less than enthusiastic. Emily shot Tyler a look, then turned to Jamal. "Actually, we were thinking of doing something else," she said, glancing at the others for confirmation. They all nodded in agreement. "Oh," Jamal said, trying to hide his disappointment. "Like what?" Emily shrugged, a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "We're just gonna hang out. You know, talk and stuff." Jamal stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Maya could see the confusion in his eyes, the way he looked at each of the kids, searching for some sign that they wanted him there. But all he found were blank faces, some even turning away. "Okay," he mumbled, stepping back again. "Maybe tomorrow then." The group started walking away, heading toward the playground, leaving Jamal standing alone by the court. Maya watched as he slowly walked back to her, the bounce in his step completely gone. He sat down beside her, not saying anything at first. Maya put her arm around him, pulling him close. "I'm sorry, honey," she said softly. Jamal stared down at the ball in his lap, his fingers tracing the grooves. "Why don't they want to play with me, Mom?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya's heart ached at the question. She searched for the right words, but nothing seemed adequate. "Sometimes," she began carefully, "people can be mean without a good reason. They might not understand how special you are." Jamal looked up at her, his eyes searching hers. "But I didn't do anything wrong." "I know, sweetie," Maya said, hugging him a little tighter. "It's not about you. Sometimes people are different, and they don't know how to act. But that's their problem, not yours." Jamal nodded, though he still looked sad. "Maybe tomorrow will be better," he said, more to himself than to her. Maya forced a smile. "Maybe it will," she agreed, though inside doubt was growing. As they left the park, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. The shadows of exclusion were starting to stretch longer, and Maya knew she would have to be ready to face whatever came next. The sun hung lower in the sky as Maya and Jamal walked to the park, the warmth of the day slowly giving way to the coolness of evening. The park was busier than usual, filled with the chatter and laughter of children finishing up their games before dusk. Maya had hoped that the growing crowd might mean Jamal would have a better chance at being included. But as they approached the basketball court, her optimism wavered. Jamal spotted the group of kids from the previous days, and a smile spread across his face. "Mom, look! They're playing again," he said, his voice tinged with renewed hope. Maya forced herself to smile back. "Go ahead, sweetie," she encouraged. "Just remember, have fun." Jamal nodded eagerly and raced toward the court, dribbling his basketball with determination. Maya stayed back, her gaze following his every move. She could see Karen Thompson sitting on a nearby bench, chatting with another woman. Their laughter carried over the sounds of the park, carefree and oblivious to the tension that simmered just a few feet away. Jamal approached the group with the same hope he carried every day. "Can I play?" he asked, his voice upbeat. This time, Emily didn't bother to hide her annoyance. She looked at Jamal with a cold expression, her arms crossed over her chest. "We're full," she said curtly, not even making eye contact. Jamal blinked, the smile faltering on his face. "But there's enough room for one more," he pointed out, trying to stay positive. Tyler, standing next to Emily, shifted uncomfortably. He glanced at her, then back at Jamal. Maybe tomorrow, okay?" he mumbled, clearly unwilling to go against Emily. Jamal's shoulders sagged, but he nodded. "Okay," he said quietly, stepping back once again to watch from the sidelines. Maya felt a familiar pang in her chest as she watched the interaction. Her hands tightened around the book in her lap, the pages forgotten. This had gone on long enough, she thought. She couldn't just sit by and let Jamal be treated this way. As the game continued, Jamal stood off to the side, trying to remain patient. But Maya could see the hurt in his eyes, the way he tried to hide his disappointment. She glanced over at Karen, who was still chatting away, oblivious to what was happening on the court. A sudden, sharp movement caught Maya's attention. Emily, dribbling the ball, made a quick turn and collided with Jamal, who had stepped closer to the court. The impact sent Jamal stumbling backward, and he landed hard on the pavement, the sound of his fall echoing in Maya's ears. Without thinking, Maya was on her feet and rushing toward Jamal. "Jamal!" she called, her heart racing. Jamal sat up, rubbing his elbow where he had scraped it on the ground. His eyes were wide with shock, but before he could react, Emily was already standing over him, her expression a mixture of feigned innocence and annoyance. "You shouldn't have been standing so close," Emily said coolly, her voice devoid of any real concern. "It's your own fault." Maya reached Jamal and knelt beside him, her hand gently touching his elbow. "Are you okay, baby?" she asked, her voice soft but laced with worry. Jamal nodded, though his eyes were starting to water. "I'm okay, Mom," he whispered, trying to be brave. Maya's gaze snapped to Emily, her anger simmering just below the surface. "He was just watching the game," she said, her tone sharper than she intended. "There's no need to push him." Emily shrugged, clearly unbothered. "I didn't push him," she said flatly. "He was in the way." Before Maya could respond, Karen's voice cut through the tension. "Maya, what's going on?" Maya looked up to see Karen approaching, a look of mild concern on her face, though it didn't reach her eyes. The other parents had started to notice the commotion, their attention shifting from their conversations to the scene unfolding on the court. "Jamal got knocked over," Maya explained, keeping her voice as calm as she could. "I just want to make sure he's okay." Karen glanced at Jamal, then at Emily. "Emily, what happened?" she asked, her tone gentle, as if she were asking about a minor mishap. Emily shrugged again. "He was too close to the court. I didn't mean to bump into him." Karen nodded, then turned back to Maya. "It sounds like an accident. Kids can be a little rough sometimes, you know how it is." Maya felt her frustration rising. "Maybe, but this isn't the first time Jamal's had trouble joining in. I think we need to talk about it." Karen's expression shifted, her smile tight. "I understand you're concerned, but kids are kids. They're still figuring out how to play together." Maya shook her head, unwilling to let the issue slide. "It's more than that, Karen. Jamal's been trying to play with the group for days, and every time he's pushed aside or ignored. This isn't just about kids being kids." Karen's smile faded slightly, and she straightened her posture. "Maya, I really don't think it's as serious as you're making it out to be. I'm sure Jamal will fit in once he gets to know the other kids better. You just need to give it time." Maya felt a flash of anger, but she kept her voice steady. "I don't think time is the issue here, Karen. It's about the way he's being treated. It's not fair." The tension between them was palpable, drawing the attention of the other parents. Maya could feel their eyes on her, could sense the subtle shift in the atmosphere as they quietly sided with Karen. Karen sighed, her tone becoming more dismissive. "Look, I don't want to make this into a big deal. Emily didn't mean any harm, and I'm sure the other kids didn't either. Maybe Jamal just needs to adjust a little. It's hard being the new kid." Maya bit back the retort that was on the tip of her tongue. She knew pushing the issue further would only make things worse, at least for now. but she couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in her gut that told her this was about more than just kids being kids. She helped Jamal to his feet, brushing the dirt off his knees. "Let's go home, Jamal," she said quietly. Jamal nodded, his gaze fixed on the ground. "Okay, Mom," he mumbled, his earlier enthusiasm completely drained. As they walked away from the court, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The shadows in the playground were growing longer, and Maya knew that if she didn't stand up for her son, those shadows would only continue to spread. The following day, Maya found herself lingering by the window, watching as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The park was visible from where she stood, and she could already see children beginning to gather. Jamal hadn't mentioned wanting to go back today, and Maya wasn't sure whether to encourage him or let it go for now. She knew he was trying to be strong, but the past few days had taken a toll on him. Jamal entered the room, his expression subdued. He had his basketball tucked under his arm, and Maya could see the conflict in his eyes. "Do you want to try the park again today?" she asked gently, trying to gauge his feelings. Jamal hesitated, glancing down at the ball. "I guess so," he said quietly, though there was no conviction in his voice. Maya's heart ached for him. She wanted to shield him from the pain, to find a way to make things right, but she also knew that avoiding the park wouldn't solve the problem. "Okay," she said, forcing a smile. "We can go for a little while, and if you're not having fun, we can leave. How does that sound?" Jamal nodded, though he didn't look up. "Yeah, that sounds good," he mumbled. The walk to the park was quiet, the usual chatter between them replaced by a heavy silence. Maya could feel the tension in the air, thick and oppressive. She tried to keep her thoughts positive, to remind herself that today could be different. But the doubts lingered, stubborn and insistent. When they arrived at the park, the familiar sight of the children on the basketball court greeted them. Emily and her group were already there, laughing and talking as they played. Maya noticed Karen sitting on the same bench as before, deep in conversation with another mother. The sight of her made Maya's stomach twist. Jamal slowed his pace as they approached the court, his steps growing more hesitant. Maya could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the way he kept glancing at the group, as if hoping for some sign of welcome. "Do you want to try asking them again?" Maya asked softly, crouching down to his level. Jamal bit his lip, his gaze shifting between his mother and the kids on the court. "I don't know, Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if they don't want me to play?" Maya's heart clenched at the question. She placed a hand on his shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Then we'll find something else to do. But I think it's worth giving it another shot. You're a great player, Jamal. They just need to see that." Jamal nodded slowly, though he still looked uncertain. "Okay," he said, taking a deep breath. "I'll try." Maya watched as Jamal walked toward the court, her heart in her throat. She stayed back, giving him the space to approach the group on his own. But every muscle in her body was tense, ready to step in if things went wrong. Jamal stopped at the edge of the court, waiting for a break in the game before speaking up. "Can I play?" he asked, his voice clear but cautious. The group paused, turning to look at him. Emily exchanged a glance with Tyler, who seemed torn between wanting to include Jamal and not wanting to go against Emily. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and heavy. We're kind of in the middle of a game," Tyler said awkwardly, scratching the back of his head. "Maybe you can join the next one." Jamal nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. "Okay," he said, stepping back to wait. He stood off to the side, watching the game unfold with a forced patience. Maya's eyes narrowed as she observed the interaction. The way the kids were handling Jamal was starting to feel less like the casual exclusion of children being children, and more like something deliberate, something they weren't saying out loud. As the game continued, Maya noticed the subtle ways the group kept Jamal on the outskirts. They never passed the ball near where he was standing, and whenever he moved closer, they adjusted their positions to keep him out. It was like watching an invisible wall being built around them, brick by brick. Finally, the game ended, and the kids gathered near the bench to rest. Jamal approached again, hopeful that this time they would let him play. "Can I join now?" Jamal asked, trying to sound casual, but there was a hint of desperation in his voice. Emily rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed by his persistence. "I don't think we're going to play another game," she said dismissively. "We're just going to hang out for a bit." Jamal's face fell, but he nodded, trying to hide his hurt. "Okay," he said quietly, stepping back once again. Maya had seen enough. She stood up and walked over to where Jamal was standing, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. "Jamal, why don't we go get some ice cream?" she suggested, keeping her voice light, though inside she was seething. Jamal looked up at her, his eyes brightening slightly at the suggestion. Yeah, that sounds good, he said, grateful for the escape. As they turned to leave, Maya caught Karen's eye. Karen gave her a tight-lipped smile, but there was no warmth in it. Maya returned the smile, but it was forced. The tension between them unspoken but unmistakable. The walk to the ice cream shop was quiet, but it wasn't the heavy silence of before. Jamal seemed to relax as they left the park behind, the promise of a sweet treat lifting his spirits. Maya, however, couldn't shake the anger that simmered beneath the surface. Once they reached the shop, Maya ordered their usual, chocolate for Jamal and vanilla for herself. They found a small table by the window, and for a few moments the simple pleasure of ice cream helped to ease the tension between them. Thanks, Mom, Jamal said as he took a bite of his ice cream, a small smile finally appearing on his face. Maya smiled back, though her thoughts were still swirling. You're welcome, sweetie, she said, reaching out to ruffle his hair. You deserve it. As they sat in the shop, the sun beginning to set outside, Maya couldn't stop thinking about the day's events. The way the kids had treated Jamal, the way Karen had dismissed her concerns. It all pointed to something deeper, something that made Maya's skin crawl. She knew she had to do something. This wasn't just about Jamal being the new kid or needing time to adjust. This was about something much uglier, something that had been lurking beneath the surface since the day they arrived in the neighborhood. Maya looked at Jamal, who was happily finishing his ice cream, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her. She couldn't let this continue. She had to protect her son, but she also had to confront the reality of what they were facing. The divide between them and the rest of the neighborhood was growing more apparent with each passing day. And Maya knew that if she didn't stand up now, that divide would only get wider. Maya woke up the next morning with a sense of resolve that had been building since their trip to the ice cream shop. She knew she couldn't ignore the situation any longer. If she didn't speak up now, things would only get worse for Jamal. She wasn't sure what she was going to say, but she knew she had to say something. Jamal was in the living room, playing with his action figures, the television on in the background. Maya could see the slight shadow of yesterday's event still lingering in his expression, but he was doing his best to act like everything was fine. It broke her heart to see him trying so hard to be strong. Hey, buddy, Maya said as she walked into the room, sitting down beside him. How about we take a walk to the park later? Just you and me? Jamal looked up at her, his eyes hesitant. Are we going to see the other kids again? He asked quietly. Maya shook her head. No, we'll go early, before they get there. I just want to spend some time with you. Jamal nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Okay, that sounds nice. Later that morning, they set off for the park, the air cool and crisp in the early hours. The park was nearly empty, just a few joggers and parents with strollers enjoying the peacefulness before the crowds arrived. Maya and Jamal walked along the path, the sounds of birds chirping in the trees around them. They reached the playground, and Jamal immediately ran over to the swings. Maya followed, pushing him gently as he soared back and forth, his laughter filling the air. For a moment, everything felt normal, like the last few days hadn't happened. But Maya knew better than to let herself get too comfortable. After a while, they sat down on a bench near the basketball court, Jamal resting his head on Maya's shoulder. They watched as a few kids arrived, their parents trailing behind them, but none of the kids from Emily's group were there yet. Maya knew it was only a matter of time before they showed up. She wasn't looking forward to it, but she also knew she needed to confront what was happening, even if it was just to herself. As they sat there, Maya noticed Karen approaching, her expression neutral. Emily was with her, holding a basketball and chatting with another girl as they made their way to the court. Maya's stomach tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. Morning, Maya, Karen said as she reached the bench, her tone friendly but guarded. Nice day, isn't it? Maya nodded, giving her a polite smile. It is. We decided to come out early, before it gets too crowded. Karen glanced at Jamal, who was still resting against Maya. That's a good idea, she said, her eyes flicking back to Maya. I've been meaning to talk to you, actually. Maya's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. Oh, about what? Karen hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. I've noticed that Jamal's been having a little trouble fitting in with the other kids. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay. Maya felt a surge of frustration, but she kept her voice calm. He's trying his best, but it hasn't been easy for him. I think the other kids could be a bit more welcoming. Karen nodded slowly, as if considering her response. I understand that, but you know how kids are. They can be a little rougher around the edges, especially when they're not used to someone new. Maya's jaw tightened, but she forced herself to stay composed. I get that, Karen, but it's more than just being rough around the edges. Jamal's been trying to join in, and he's been pushed aside every time. I'm not saying the kids are doing it on purpose, but it's hurting him. Karen's expression softened, but there was still a hint of defensiveness in her tone. I don't think they're trying to exclude him, Maya. They're just used to their own group. It takes time for kids to adjust. Maya nodded, though she didn't entirely agree. I understand that, but I also think it's important for them to be more inclusive. It's not just about adjusting. It's about being kind and making an effort. Karen sighed as if the conversation was more of a burden than she had anticipated. I'll talk to Emily, she said, her tone still guarded. But I think we need to be careful not to make this into something it's not. Kids will be kids, and sometimes they just need to figure things out on their own. Maya's patience was wearing thin, but she kept her voice even. I'm not trying to make a big deal out of it, Karen. I just want Jamal to have the same chance as everyone else. He deserves that. Karen's eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time, there was a hint of irritation in her voice. I'm sure you do, but I also think it's important to let them handle things without too much interference. Sometimes parents can make things worse by getting too involved. Maya felt a flash of anger, but she took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. I agree that kids need to learn to handle things on their own, but that doesn't mean we should ignore when something isn't right. We're their parents, Karen. It's our job to step in when they need us. Karen's expression shifted, the tension between them palpable. I'll talk to Emily, she repeated, her tone firmer now. But I really think you're overthinking this, Maya. Kids have a way of working things out. Just give it some time. Maya knew that pushing the issue further would only lead to more conflict, and she didn't want to escalate things, at least not here and now. But she also knew that Karen's response wasn't enough. It was a dismissal, a way of brushing aside the problem without really addressing it. Thanks, Karen, Maya said finally, forcing a smile. I appreciate it. Karen returned the smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. Of course, we're all just trying to do what's best for our kids. Maya nodded, though inside she was far from satisfied. As Karen and Emily walked away, Maya felt a wave of frustration and helplessness wash over her. She had tried to address the issue calmly, but Karen's response had only reinforced the sense that they were on their own. Jamal looked up at her, his eyes full of questions. Are we going home now, Mom? He asked, his voice small. Maya pulled him into a hug, holding him close. Not yet, baby, she said softly. We'll stay a little longer. As they sat there, the sun rising higher in the sky, Maya knew that this was only the beginning. The quiet confrontation with Karen had made it clear that the underlying issues were not going to be resolved easily. But Maya was determined to protect her son, no matter what it took. And she knew that the time for being polite and patient was quickly running out. The rest of the day passed in a blur for Maya. She tried to stay busy, focusing on chores around the house and keeping Jamal occupied with games and activities. But no matter what she did, her thoughts kept returning to the conversation with Karen at the park. The dismissiveness in Karen's tone, the way she had brushed aside Maya's concerns as if they were nothing, it all left a sour taste in Maya's mouth. That evening, after putting Jamal to bed, Maya sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring out the window at the darkening sky. The quiet of the house felt heavy, oppressive. She had always been a strong woman, someone who faced challenges head on. But this was different. This wasn't just about her. It was about Jamal, about protecting him from a world that seemed intent on pushing him aside. Maya had seen it before, in subtle ways throughout her life. Those unspoken barriers, the small but sharp reminders that she was different, that her son was different. But she had never imagined it would hit so close to home, in a place where they were supposed to feel safe and accepted. The realization that they were facing this in their own neighborhood was a bitter pill to swallow. She thought back to the conversation with Karen, replaying it in her mind. The way Karen had been so quick to defend the other kids, to downplay what was happening. It was clear that Karen didn't see the situation the same way Maya did. Or maybe she didn't want to see it. Maya wasn't sure which was worse. As she sat there, lost in thought, Maya's phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up, seeing a message from one of her neighbors, Mrs. Harris. The older woman had been one of the first people to welcome Maya and Jamal to the neighborhood, bringing over a plate of cookies and offering to help with anything they needed. Mrs. Harris had always seemed kind and genuine, and Maya had appreciated the warmth she showed. The message was simple. Hi, Maya. How are you? I've been thinking about you and Jamal. Let me know if you need anything. Maya stared at the message for a moment, feeling a pang of emotion. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it meant the world to her. She quickly typed a response, thanking Mrs. Harris and letting her know they were doing okay, but that she appreciated the offer. As she set the phone down, a thought began to form in Maya's mind. Maybe Mrs. Harris wasn't the only one who cared, the only one who would be willing to listen. Maya had been so focused on the negativity, on the way the neighborhood seemed to close ranks around Karen and the other parents, that she hadn't considered that there might be others who would support her and Jamal. It was a small hope, but it was enough to spark a new resolve in her. Maya knew that she couldn't stay silent any longer. She had to take action, to speak up, not just for Jamal, but for every child who had ever felt excluded or pushed aside, and she knew that she couldn't do it alone. The next morning, Maya woke up early, her mind already racing with ideas. She had never been one to organize community events or get involved in neighborhood politics, but this was different. This was about making sure her son felt safe and accepted, and she was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. After breakfast, Maya sat down at her computer and began drafting an email to the neighborhood association. She kept it simple and straightforward, outlining her concerns about the way the children were interacting at the park and suggesting that they organize a community meeting to discuss how to make the neighborhood more inclusive. As she typed, Maya felt a sense of determination settle over her. She wasn't sure how the other parents would react, but she knew she had to try. If nothing else, she wanted them to understand that this wasn't just about kids being kids. It was about something deeper, something that needed to be addressed. Once the email was finished, Maya hesitated for a moment before hitting send. She knew that by doing this, she was opening herself up to criticism, to potentially making things even more difficult for Jamal. But she also knew that staying silent would only make things worse in the long run. With a deep breath, she sent the email and leaned back in her chair, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. The ball was rolling now, and there was no turning back. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. Maya tried to keep things as normal as possible for Jamal, taking him to the library and then to a nearby cafe for lunch. They talked about school, about the books he was reading, and for a while it felt like things were back to normal. But the weight of what she had set in motion was always there, lingering in the back of her mind. That evening, as they were sitting down for dinner, Maya's phone buzzed again. She picked it up, seeing a new message in her inbox. It was from Mrs. Harris, responding to the email Maya had sent earlier. Maya, thank you for bringing this up. I've noticed some things too, and I think it's important that we talk about it as a community. You have my full support. Let me know how I can help. Maya felt a wave of gratitude wash over her as she read the message. It was a small victory, but it was enough to give her hope that she wasn't alone in this. Over the next few days, more responses trickled in, some supportive, others more cautious. A few parents expressed concern about the tone of the conversation, worried that it might cause unnecessary tension in the neighborhood. But there were also those who agreed with Maya, who wanted to make sure that every child felt included and valued. As the date for the community meeting approached, Maya felt a growing sense of anticipation. She knew that this was just the beginning, that there would be challenges and pushback along the way. But she also knew that she was doing the right thing, not just for Jamal, but for every child in the neighborhood. On the day of the meeting, Maya arrived at the community center early, her heart pounding with nerves. She had never been one to speak in front of a group, but she knew she had to find the courage to do so now. As she set up the chairs and arranged the refreshments, she took a few deep breaths, reminding herself why she was doing this. When the other parents began to arrive, Maya was surprised to see how many had come. There were familiar faces like Mrs. Harris, and others she didn't know as well. Karen was there too, standing off to the side with a few other mothers, her expression unreadable. As the meeting began, Maya stood up and introduced herself, her voice shaking slightly. She spoke about her concerns, about the way Jamal had been treated, and about the importance of creating a community where every child felt welcome. As she spoke, she could see the expressions of the parents around her, some nodding in agreement, others looking uncomfortable. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. And then Mrs. Harris stood up, offering her support and sharing her own observations. One by one, other parents began to speak, some sharing their own experiences, others expressing their worries about how to address the issue without causing more division. Karen was the last to speak. She stood up slowly, her gaze steady as she looked around the room. "I think we all want what's best for our kids," she said, her voice calm. "And I agree that we need to make sure everyone feels included. But I also think we need to be careful not to overreact. Kids can be rough on each other sometimes, and I don't want us to create a situation where they feel like they're being watched too closely." Maya listened carefully, understanding Karen's point, but still feeling the need to push back. "I agree that we don't want to smother them," Maya said, her voice measured. "But I also think we need to be aware of when something isn't just kids being rough. When it's about more than just not getting along, we have to step in. I think we can find a balance." The room was quiet for a moment, the tension thick in the air. Then Mrs. Harris spoke up again. "I think Maya's right. We need to find that balance. We all want our kids to be safe and happy, and that means making sure they know they're part of this community, no matter who they are." There were murmurs of agreement around the room, and Maya felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start, and it was more than she had hoped for when she first sent that email. As the meeting wrapped up, parents began to approach Maya, thanking her for bringing the issue to their attention and offering their support. Even Karen, though still cautious, gave her a nod of acknowledgement. When Maya left the community center that evening, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would be more challenges to face. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't facing them alone. And as she walked home with Jamal by her side, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was determined to make sure that he and every child in the neighborhood would have the chance to grow up in a place where they felt valued, accepted, and safe. The days following the community meeting brought a noticeable shift in the neighborhood. As Maya walked through the park with Jamal, she could feel the eyes on her, the hushed conversations that stopped as she passed. She was used to being the subject of whispers, but this time it was different. There was a new tension in the air, a sense that the meeting had stirred something beneath the surface. The kids at the park seemed more cautious, their interactions stilted and unsure. The easy laughter and playful shouts were gone, replaced by nervous glances and hesitant steps. Jamal noticed it too, and he clung closer to Maya, his usual eagerness to play with the other children replaced by uncertainty. One afternoon, as they arrived at the park, Maya noticed a group of mothers standing near the playground, their conversation animated. Karen was at the center, her voice carrying over the sound of the children's games. Maya couldn't make out the words, but she didn't need to. The sideways glances and tight smiles told her everything she needed to know. Jamal seemed to sense the tension as well. He slowed his steps, glancing up at Maya with a question in his eyes. "Mom, are we going to play today?" he asked quietly, his fingers tightening around her hand. Maya knelt down beside him, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. "Of course we are, baby," she said, her voice steady. "You go have fun, okay? I'll be right here." Jamal nodded, though his steps were hesitant as he made his way to the swings. Maya watched as he sat down, pushing himself slowly, his eyes scanning the playground for any sign of the other kids. Across the park, Emily and a few other children were huddled around the jungle gym, their voices low. Maya noticed how they kept glancing in Jamal's direction, whispering to each other before quickly looking away. It was clear that the meeting had left its mark, but not in the way she had hoped. As she sat on the bench, Maya's thoughts drifted back to the community meeting. The support she had received had been heartening, but the undercurrents of resistance and discomfort were hard to ignore. She knew that change wouldn't come easily, especially when it involved challenging deep-seated beliefs and behaviors. After a while, Mrs. Harris approached, her expression warm but tinged with concern. She sat down beside Maya, glancing over at Jamal on the swings. "How are you holding up?" Mrs. Harris asked gently. Maya sighed, grateful for the concern. "It's been a lot," she admitted. "I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I didn't expect it to be this hard. I just want Jamal to feel like he belongs here, but it feels like we've stirred up a hornet's nest." Mrs. Harris nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "Change is always difficult, especially when it forces people to confront things they'd rather not think about. But you did the right thing, Maya. This needed to be addressed, and you were brave enough to do it." Maya appreciated the words, but they didn't erase the weight she felt pressing down on her. "I just hope it doesn't make things worse for Jamal. He's been through enough already." Mrs. Harris reached over, placing a comforting hand on Maya's arm. "Jamal's a strong boy. just like his mother. He'll get through this. And you're not alone in this, Maya. There are more people who support you than you realize. Maya gave her a small smile, but before she could respond, the sound of raised voices drew their attention. Jamal had left the swings and was approaching the jungle gym, where Emily and the other children were gathered. They were talking loudly now, their words sharp and angry. I told you, you can't play with us. Emily's voice rang out. Her arms crossed over her chest as she glared at Jamal. Maya's heart sank as she watched the scene unfold. She wanted to intervene, to protect Jamal from the hurt that was sure to come, but something held her back. She knew Jamal needed to learn to stand up for himself, even though it pained her to watch. Jamal stopped in his tracks, his small frame trembling slightly. Why not? He asked, his voice barely audible. I just want to play. Emily rolled her eyes, her tone dismissive. Because we don't want to play with you. Go find someone else to bother. The other children snickered, and Jamal's shoulders slumped. Ma. He turned back toward the swings, his steps slow and heavy. Maya's heart ached as she watched him retreat. She wanted to rush over, to comfort him, but she knew that would only make things worse. Instead, she clenched her fists, willing herself to stay calm. Mrs. Harris sighed, shaking her head. It's going to take time, Maya, she said softly. Kids can be cruel, but they can also learn. We just have to keep pushing forward. Maya nodded, though her eyes remained fixed on Jamal. I know. I just hate seeing him go through this. He deserves better. He does, Mrs. Harris agreed, and that's why we have to keep fighting for him, for all the kids. As the sun began to set, Maya called Jamal over, her voice gentle. He came to her, his eyes downcast, but he didn't say anything. She could see the hurt in his expression, the way he was trying to hold it all in. Come on, sweetie, Maya said, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. Let's go home. They walked in silence, the weight of the day hanging heavy between them. When they reached their house, Maya knelt down, turning Jamal to face her. I'm proud of you, Jamal, she said, her voice firm. I know today was hard, but you did the right thing by trying. It's not always going to be easy, but you're strong, and I'm always going to be here for you, okay? Jamal nodded, though he didn't meet her eyes. Okay, Mom. Maya pulled him into a tight hug, feeling the warmth of his small body against hers. I love you, baby. We're going to get through this together. As she held him close, Maya felt a renewed sense of determination. The road ahead was going to be long and difficult, but she knew she couldn't give up, not when so much was at stake. Later that evening, after Jamal had gone to bed, Maya sat down at the kitchen table, her mind racing with thoughts and ideas. She knew she needed to do more, to find a way to reach out to the other parents, to show them that this wasn't just about Jamal, it was about all of their children, about creating a community where everyone felt welcome. She decided to start by organizing a small neighborhood gathering, something casual and friendly, where the kids could play together and the parents could talk. It wasn't much, but it was a step in the right direction, a way to keep the conversation going without the pressure of a formal meeting. As she began drafting invitations, Maya felt a sense of purpose settling over her. This was her community too, and she was determined to make it a place where her son could thrive. And she knew that no matter how difficult things became, she would never stop fighting for Jamal, for his right to be seen, heard, and valued. The neighborhood gathering was set for the following Saturday, and as the day approached, Maya felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. She had spent the week preparing, sending out invitations, organizing activities, and coordinating with Mrs. Harris to ensure everything went smoothly. She wanted the event to be more than just a social occasion. It needed to be a step toward healing the rift that had formed in the community. On the morning of the gathering, Maya woke up early to start setting up. The park looked peaceful in the soft light of dawn, and for a moment she allowed herself to hope that today might be different, that maybe, just maybe, this event could help bridge the divide. She had arranged for a few tables to be set up along the edges of the park, covered in bright tablecloths and adorned with simple decorations. There were snacks and drinks for the kids, along with a variety of games and activities to keep them entertained. Maya had also prepared a few conversation starters, small cards with questions designed to encourage the parents to engage in meaningful dialogue. As the morning wore on, families began to arrive. Some came with smiles and warm greetings, while others seemed more hesitant, their eyes scanning the park as if unsure of what to expect. Maya did her best to greet everyone, offering a welcoming smile and directing them to the activities. Jamal stayed close by her side, his hand gripping hers tightly. She could sense his unease, the way his eyes darted around the park, searching for any sign of trouble. "It's going to be okay," Maya reassured him, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. "Just try to have fun, okay?" Jamal nodded, though his expression remained uncertain. Maya wished she could do more to ease his worries, but she knew that some things he would have to face on his own. She watched as he finally let go of her hand and made his way over to the table where a group of children were coloring. Among the children was Emily, who glanced up as Jamal approached. There was a brief moment of tension, a silent exchange between them, before she scooted over slightly to make room for him at the table. Maya noticed the small gesture and felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As the morning turned into afternoon, the atmosphere at the gathering began to shift. The initial awkwardness slowly gave way to a more relaxed and open mood. The children, caught up in their games and activities, seemed to forget their earlier tensions. Laughter and shouts of excitement filled the air, and for the first time in weeks, the park felt alive with the sounds of carefree play. Maya moved among the parents, engaging them in conversation and gently guiding the discussion toward the issues that had brought them together. She listened more than she spoke, wanting to understand their concerns and perspectives. At one point, she found herself talking to Karen, who had been quiet and reserved for most of the gathering. Karen's expression was guarded, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she was willing to listen. "This turned out nice," Karen said, her tone measured. "The kids seem to be having a good time." Maya nodded, grateful for the opening. "I'm glad they are. I think it's important for them to see us coming together like this." Karen hesitated before speaking again. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the meeting, about making sure everyone feels included." Maya waited, sensing that Karen had more to say. "I didn't want to believe that what happened was anything more than kids just being kids," Karen admitted, her voice quiet. "But I've been thinking about it, and I don't want to be the kind of person who ignores something that's right in front of me." Maya felt a rush of emotion at Karen's words. This was the first time Karen had acknowledged the possibility that there was something more at play than just childish behavior. "It's not easy to see, especially when it's your own child," Maya said gently. "But it means a lot to me that you're willing to think about it." Karen nodded, though her expression was still conflicted. "I just want to do what's best for Emily, and I know you want the same for Jamal. Maybe we can figure out how to help them understand each other better." Maya smiled, feeling a sense of connection she hadn't expected. "I'd like that," she said sincerely. "I think it would be good for both of them." As they talked, Maya noticed Jamal and Emily playing together at the edge of the park. They were taking turns on the slide, their laughter carrying on the breeze. It was a small moment, but it filled Maya with hope. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of conversations, games, and shared laughter. By the time the sun began to set, the park was filled with the warm glow of early evening, and the gathering began to wind down. Parents slowly started to pack up, saying their goodbyes and expressing their gratitude to Maya for organizing the event. As the last of the families left, Mrs. Harris approached Maya, her smile bright and encouraging. "You did a wonderful job today, Maya. This was exactly what we needed." Maya felt a surge of pride, though she knew there was still much work to be done. "Thank you, Mrs. Harris. I'm just glad people came. I wasn't sure how it would go." "It went better than I expected," Mrs. Harris said, glancing around the now quiet park. "You've made a real difference here. People are starting to listen, to think differently. That's no small thing." Maya nodded, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. "I hope so. I just want Jamal to feel like he belongs." "He will," Mrs. Harris said confidently, "and you've shown the rest of us how to make that happen." As they gathered up the remaining supplies and prepared to leave, Maya looked back at the park, now empty except for the faint echoes of the day's laughter. She knew that this was just the beginning, that there would be more challenges ahead, but for the first time, she felt like they were on the right path. On the way home, Jamal walked beside her, his steps lighter than they had been in weeks. "Mom, today was fun," he said, his voice filled with a simple joy that made Maya's heart swell. "I'm glad you had fun, Jamal," Maya replied, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "We're going to have more days like this, I promise." Jamal nodded, leaning into her side as they walked. The road ahead might be long, but Maya knew they would face it together, one step at a time. And with the support of the community behind them, she felt more hopeful than ever that they would find their way through. The neighborhood gathering had left a mark on Karen. For days afterward, she found herself replaying the conversations in her mind, especially the one she'd had with Maya. The tension that had built up since the incident at the park was still there, but it had softened, leaving behind a sense of unease that Karen couldn't shake. She had always prided herself on being a good person, a good mother, and a responsible member of the community. But the gathering had forced her to confront some uncomfortable truths, ones she had been avoiding for far too long. One evening, after putting Emily to bed, Karen sat alone at the kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. She stared out the window at the darkening sky, her mind heavy with thoughts. She knew she needed to talk to someone about what she was feeling, but she wasn't sure where to start. Tom, her husband, was out of town on business, and while they had discussed the situation briefly, Karen hadn't gone into much detail. She wasn't sure he would understand the depth of what she was struggling with. With a sigh, she picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts. After a moment's hesitation, she tapped on Mrs. Harris's name. The elderly woman had always been a source of wisdom and comfort in the neighborhood, and Karen hoped she might offer some clarity. "Hello, Mrs. Harris? It's Karen," she said when the older woman answered. "Karen, it's good to hear from you," Mrs. Harris replied warmly. "How are you doing?" Karen hesitated, searching for the right words. "I'm not sure," she admitted finally. "I've been thinking a lot since the gathering, and I realize there's a lot I don't understand." Mrs. Harris's voice was gentle but encouraging. "It's good that you're thinking about these things, Karen. What's on your mind?" Karen took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I guess I'm just realizing that I've been avoiding some hard truths. I didn't want to see that there was more to what happened between Emily and Jamal than just kids being kids. But after talking to Maya and seeing the way the other parents reacted, I'm starting to see that maybe I've been blind to a lot of things." There was a brief pause before Mrs. Harris responded. "It takes courage to admit that, Karen. We all have blind spots, and it's not easy to confront them. But the fact that you're willing to look at this honestly is a step in the right direction." Karen felt a small sense of relief at Mrs. Harris's words. "I want to do better," she said quietly, "for Emily and for myself. But I'm not sure where to start." "Start by listening," Mrs. Harris advised. "Listen to what people like Maya have to say. Educate yourself about the experiences of others, and don't be afraid to ask questions, even if the answers make you uncomfortable. It's okay to feel uneasy. Change often starts with discomfort." Karen nodded, though Mrs. Harris couldn't see her. "Thank you, Mrs. Harris. I appreciate your advice." "Any time, dear," Mrs. Harris replied warmly. "Remember, you're not alone in this. We're all learning and growing together." After they hung up, Karen sat in silence for a while, reflecting on the conversation. Mrs. Harris's words had resonated with her, and she knew she needed to take them to heart. The next step was clear. She had to talk to Maya again, but this time with a more open mind and a willingness to learn. The next day, Karen took the opportunity to visit Maya when she saw her outside with Jamal. It was a warm afternoon and Maya was sitting on her porch, watching Jamal ride his bike up and down the sidewalk. Karen approached with a mixture of apprehension and determination. "Hi, Maya," Karen said as she reached the porch. Maya looked up, her expression curious but welcoming. "Hi, Karen, how are you?" Karen offered a small smile, though it was tinged with nervousness. "I'm okay. I was hoping we could talk for a bit, if you have time." "Of course," Maya said, motioning for Karen to sit beside her. "What's on your mind?" Karen took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since the neighborhood gathering, and I realize that I owe you an apology. I didn't handle things well after what happened at the park, and I've been avoiding facing the truth about what was really going on." Maya listened intently, her expression thoughtful. "It's not easy to admit when we've made mistakes," she said gently. "I appreciate that you're willing to talk about it." Karen nodded, grateful for Maya's understanding. "I want to do better, Maya, for Emily's sake, and for Jamal's. But I'm not sure where to start. I know there's a lot I don't understand, and I was hoping you might be willing to help me learn." Maya was silent for a moment, considering Karen's words. When she spoke, her tone was kind but firm. "I'm willing to talk, Karen, but it's important that you're ready to listen, even if what you hear isn't easy. This isn't just about Emily and Jamal, it's about all of us, in the kind of community we want to create." Karen nodded, her resolve strengthening. "I'm ready to listen, Maya. I want to be part of that change." They talked for a long time, with Maya sharing her experiences and perspectives, and Karen asking questions and reflecting on her own biases. It was a difficult conversation at times, but it was also cathartic, a necessary step toward understanding and growth. As they spoke, Karen began to see the world through Maya's eyes, to understand the challenges she faced every day, as a black mother in a predominantly white community. She realized how much she had taken for granted, how often she had overlooked the subtle ways racism and prejudice could manifest. By the time their conversation ended, Karen felt a sense of clarity she hadn't had before. She knew there was still much to learn, but she was determined to make the effort. She wanted to be a better person, a better mother, and a better neighbor. Before leaving, Karen turned to Maya with a sincere expression. "Thank you, Maya, for your patience and for being willing to talk to me. I know I have a long way to go, but I'm committed to doing the work." Maya smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes. "We're all on this journey together, Karen. The important thing is that you're willing to start, and I'm here if you ever need to talk." Karen left Maya's house with a renewed sense of purpose. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready to face it, one step at a time. And she was determined to do her part in making their community a place where everyone could feel valued and included. As she walked home, Karen felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful. Hopeful that change was possible, and that she could be part of that change. It wouldn't happen overnight, but with patience, understanding, and a willingness to learn, she believed they could build a better future for their children. And that was a future worth fighting for. The crisp air of early autumn settled over the neighborhood, bringing with it a sense of change. The trees had begun to shed their leaves, painting the streets in warm shades of orange and red. Maya felt the season's shift reflected in her own life, subtle, gradual, but undeniable. It had been a few weeks since Karen and Maya had their heart-to-heart conversation on the porch. Since then, there had been small but meaningful changes within the community. Conversations that once would have been avoided were now taking place, and there was a growing awareness of the need for understanding and inclusivity. One Saturday morning, Maya and Jamal were walking to the park, their favorite weekend routine. Jamal's steps were lighter, his face brighter than it had been in a long time. The cloud that had hung over him since the bullying incident had started to lift, and Maya couldn't help but feel a surge of hope as she watched her son's growing confidence. When they arrived at the park, Maya noticed a group of children playing together near the swings. Among them was Emily, her blonde hair catching the sunlight as she laughed and chased after a soccer ball. Jamal spotted her too, and for a moment he hesitated. "Go on," Maya encouraged, giving him a gentle nudge. "You can join them if you want." Jamal looked up at her, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "Do you think they'll let me?" Maya knelt down to his level, her expression serious but tender. "You won't know unless you try. Remember, you're just as welcome here as anyone else." Jamal nodded slowly, then took a deep breath before walking over to the group. Maya watched as he approached the other children, her heart in her throat. She wanted so badly for him to be accepted, to feel like he belonged. To her relief, Emily noticed Jamal and smiled. "Hey, Jamal, want to play?" The invitation was simple, casual, but it meant the world to Maya. She watched as Jamal's face lit up with a smile of his own, and he nodded eagerly. The other children welcomed him into the game without hesitation, and soon they were all running around together, their laughter filling the air. Maya settled onto a bench, her gaze never straying far from Jamal. As she watched him play, she felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what she had wanted for him, for all of them. A community where differences were embraced, where everyone had a place. As she sat there lost in thought, she noticed Karen walking toward her, a friendly smile on her face. Karen's visits had become more frequent since their conversation, and the two women had started to develop a genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and a shared desire to create a better environment for their children. "Mind if I join you?" Karen asked, gesturing to the empty spot on the bench. "Not at all," Maya replied, smiling as she made room. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the children play. It was a peaceful moment, one that felt earned after all the tension and challenges they had faced. "Emily's been talking about Jamal a lot lately," Karen said eventually, breaking the silence. "She's been telling me how much fun they have been having at school. I think she's really starting to see him as a friend." Maya's smile widened. "That makes me happy to hear. Jamal's been talking about Emily too. He's been so much more relaxed lately. I think being able to play with the other kids without any tension has made a big difference." Karen nodded thoughtfully. "It's amazing how quickly kids can adapt when we give them the chance. I'm glad we were able to turn things around." Maya glanced at her, a soft expression on her face. "I couldn't have done it without you, Karen. You've been a big part of this change." Karen looked down, a touch of humility in her eyes. "I just realized it was time to listen and learn. I'm still learning, but I'm glad I can do it alongside you. Maya reached over and gave Karen's hand a reassuring squeeze. We're all still learning, but the important thing is that we're moving forward together. As they continued to watch the children, the conversation turned to lighter topics. Upcoming school events, plans for the holidays, and the day-to-day moments that filled their lives. It was a conversation between friends, easy and comfortable, a sign of how far they had come. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the park. The children eventually tired of their game and came running over to their mothers, cheeks flushed and eyes bright. "Mom, can Emily and I go get ice cream?" Jamal asked, his voice full of excitement. Maya laughed at his enthusiasm. "Sure, why not? Karen, would you and Emily like to join us?" Karen smiled, her eyes meeting Maya's with a warmth that spoke of new beginnings. "We'd love to." The group made their way to the ice cream stand at the edge of the park, the children chatting animatedly as they walked. Maya felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she listened to their happy voices. This was what she had been fighting for, a community where her son could grow up feeling safe, accepted, and loved. As they sat down to enjoy their ice cream, Maya looked around at the people who had become such an important part of her life. Mrs. Harris was there too, chatting with some of the other parents who had gathered at the park. The old divisions seemed to be fading, replaced by a sense of unity and mutual support. For the first time in a long while, Maya felt truly at peace. She knew that there would still be challenges ahead, that the work of building a more inclusive community was ongoing. But she also knew that they had laid a strong foundation, one that would support them as they continued to grow and learn together. As the afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the park, Maya smiled to herself, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. This was their new beginning, a chance to create the kind of community they had always wanted. And with people like Karen and Mrs. Harris by her side, she knew they would succeed. The future looked bright, and Maya was ready to embrace it, one day at a time.